When it comes to Zack Snyder and Ben Affleck's version of Batman, aka Batfleck, there's two types of people. There's the people who think he's a god amongst men and hands down the best Batman ever put to screen, or the people who think he's the worst incarnation of the character and a complete disgrace to the source material. Honestly, I've never met someone who said, yeah, he's alright or he's okay when it comes to Batfleck. He's either their favorite or their least favorite version of the character. And for whatever reason, I always felt obsessed with movies like that, even before I started studying film. I always found myself watching those types of movies over and over again from a different perspective, and it was a different experience for me every time. So long story short, this is about my journey with Batfleck, a journey that started with indifference, that turned into confusion, which led to me kind of hating him, then to accepting him, and now to a place where I can honestly say I appreciate this take on the character. And this is Chapter 1. One thing I think we fail to realize is how much the media that we consume shapes our views on some things. Even a person like myself who considers myself to be strong-willed and doesn't follow the waves and trends of others, even I fall victim to groupthink sometimes. When I first went to go see Batman v Superman, coming out of this movie, I had so many different mixed feelings. And it was crazy because I had never felt that way about a Batman film before. I've always loved the Batman movies and I love them all for different reasons. But with this one, I legitimately couldn't decide. I couldn't tell if I enjoyed or disliked, loved or hated this film. I was really indifferent. So I did what we all do when we have some feelings about a movie that we can't explain or express properly. I went to YouTube. And everybody, and I mean everybody, was taking a fat dump on BVS. I got lost in the YouTube rabbit hole for hours and hours of people just completely nitpicking, bashing, and destroying this take on Batman.
As soon as you establish Batman as a killer on screen, that universe, that Batman becomes so much less interesting.
And the crazy thing was, I eventually but unintentionally started to feel the same way. And that's when my Indifference and Confusion turned into the title of Chapter 2. I promise I watched about 50 videos of people saying over and over, Batman does not kill. There was hundreds of think pieces and video essays of people complaining about this. All of them harp on how jaded he was in BVS, how easily manipulated he was in wanting to kill Superman, and people saying that's not Batman and that's not something that Batman would do and that just doesn't seem like the character. And the next thing you know, I started to agree with them. I mean, they got their points across so eloquently, they said it with so much passion, and they were using a bunch of fancy movie terminology that I had never heard before, so I figured they must be right? And to be honest, I was frustrated and sad that people were bashing Batman. I mean, this is Batman, my favorite character of all time. A character I spent hours in front of a TV screen watching for nearly 2/3 of my life. I just felt he was ruined, so I started bashing Snyder online like everyone else at the time. I just felt that he didn't understand these characters that meant so much to me. A year after Batman vs Superman, the Justice League came out, or what we now know as the Justice League. And I reluctantly went to go see this thing, even though I wasn't too excited going in. And I tell you what, y'all, this was the final straw.
Do you bleed? Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
This dude turned Batman into an MCU wannabe quit machine, and I was done. I was completely done with this version of the character. I mean, y'all, for real, like, I was a different version of myself. I was online tearing this dude up. And then I read online that something awful happened.
After Autumn's death and we decided to be public about her suicide, we felt like, we're public enough that we could, make a statement, because a lot of times mental health, there's such a stigma and people are afraid to talk about it or embarrassed. And through that journey with Autumn, we very many times felt the same way.
And on top of that, I found out that this happened while he was working on Justice League and he had to leave the project. He had to leave it before it was finished, and WB had been trying to get him ran off for years because they wanted to be more like Marvel. And of course, wanting to be like Marvel, WB brought in Avengers director Joss Whedon to finish the film, which is why we got that disaster in 2017. Then I had this weird feeling that came over me, something that I'd never felt before. I realized that I had been swayed by popular opinion. So I stopped being a toxic Batman stan-boy and rewatched Batman vs Superman again. But this time I watched looking for something that I now know to be subtext. And the subtext of this movie is clear as day if you really pay attention to it. The whole point of this movie is Batman is wrong. The entire point of this film is that this is not the Batman that we know. This is the Batman who lost his way, a battle scarred war veteran who had become so hell-bent on stopping criminals that he became one himself. He became the Cape Crusader so he could keep the citizens of Gotham safe, and now they fear him more than anything. And in this movie, Batfleck has been Batman for 20 years. In comparison to Christopher Nolan's Batman, he was only active for 2 years before he retired. And even in that short stint, he was becoming a very dark and distant shell of himself. He was a hermit who had little to no human interaction for the next 7 years. Only 2 years of being Batman did that to him, so just imagine if he was Batman for 20. Me personally, I love when movies propose questions, and Batman vs Superman proposed a pretty damn good one in my opinion. In a nutshell, it's asking, if Batman were real, how would this lifestyle affect him long term? Losing a son, breaking every rule you once set, seeing friends go bad, losing loved ones, facing near-death situations damn near on a monthly basis, and fighting crime in Gotham City, which is literally the world's hotspot for corruption. I think it would cause things like PTSD, trust issues, anger, resentment, and emptiness. Finally, after that last watch, I got it. I understood what this film meant and what this film was trying to say. And when I understood that, that's when my hatred for this version of Batman seemed to drop away, which leads us into the next chapter.
I failed him in life. I won't fail him in death.
As far as the questions asked in this movie, I think it did them pretty effectively. Like, if you pay attention to all of the characters who interact with or talk about Batman in this movie, it's pretty clear that people's perception of him is pretty negative. And that's something I feel like a lot of people missed when watching and reviewing this movie, but I can't blame them because I missed it too. See, I thought Zack Snyder was trying to tell the world that this is how Batman should be, but he wasn't saying that at all. The film was telling us all along that there is something wrong with this version of the character. All you really had to do was pay attention. Every side character that's interviewed in this movie, as well as Alfred's sole purpose of this whole entire film, is to be a constant reminder of that.
Only people scared of him, people who got reason to be.
Scared of who?
Well, there's a new kind of mean in him. He is angry, and he's hunting.
But even after this last watch of BVS, I still didn't necessarily love or even like the character. I just came to accept him for what he was, an Elseworld or a what-if story. And something happened in the movie industry that has never happened in cinema history. A wrong director was given a chance to finish out his vision and redo a movie that was by all definition a flop. And then we got the long-awaited, long-teased, and tweeted about, the Snyder Cut. A long-ass 4-hour epic that corrected all the flaws, all the gripes and complaints that I once had about this version of Batman. And after watching that insane masterpiece of a movie 3 times, yes, I watched this movie 3 times, I then turned around and watched Batman vs Superman again. And on this 4th watch, man, I felt something completely different than what I felt the other 3 times that I watched it. I started to feel something that I had never felt when looking at this version of the character on screen. In no way, shape, or form am I saying that Batman vs Superman is a perfect film. It's still a very flawed movie with some pacing issues and suffered from wanting to be too many different things at once. It wanted to be a Batman intro to the DCEU, as well as Man of Steel 2, a Justice League prequel, and also setting up future spin-offs after the Justice League. And as cool as that nightmare sequence was, if you take it out of the movie, the story still stands as is and probably is a lot better and less convoluted. So I definitely still have my gripes, but I must say, man, I really enjoyed Affleck as Batman. This is the first time I've seen someone on screen that legitimately felt like Batman. I love the Nolan movies, don't get me wrong, they're amazing movies, but outside of Batman Begins, they aren't really Batman movies to begin with. If you take the Batman element and make him a cop that was fired from the force, or take away the Joker element and just make him a guy with an ambiguous past, the movie still is the same. You don't really need Batman for this story. I look at the Nolan films more like just amazing films that are using Batman's likeness. I love them, but they're not Batman movies necessarily. Like I said, outside of Batman Begins. But anyways, back to BVS. It was so refreshing to see this movie through a new lens. And as for Batfleck, man, it was hella dope to see Batman do some actual detective work. He did quite a bit of detective work in this movie compared to live action versions. In my opinion, this was the best display of the Bruce Wayne and Batman duality ever put to film. As for Bruce Wayne, when he was out and about, he was kind, he was charming, just seemed like this really lovable rich guy who just loved to spend money and donate it wherever he could. But then as soon as he gets back to the cave, the real him's revealed, and he becomes this dark, broody, tattered character who just has no more hope in humanity. I even really love what they did with Superman in this film, especially when it comes to the Ultimate Edition. After all that destruction caused in Man of Steel when he fought Zod, Superman was very intentional in this movie. He made it a point to try to show the world that he was here to help. He saves a lot of people in this movie, and I mean he saves a lot of people. And most importantly, when talking about this movie, man, I think there are so many scenes that a lot of people either misunderstand altogether, or they purposely manipulate it for comedic effect or just to drive their point home. And I don't think that that's fair to this film, and I don't think it's fair to its creators either. And it's also not fair for me to keep talking your head off about this movie, y'all. I could have made this thing an hour, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet, man. Really could have got the point and the gist of this by just listening to the opening statement, but you stuck around with me on this journey anyway, and for that, guys, I thank you so much. My name is Eddie. This is Nerdy Before It Was Cool. If you like what you saw, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. I'll also leave a list of my other video essays down here for you to check out if you'd like to do so. But anyways, guys, I'm out.